Well, Kenneth, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us here and sharing your story. We always like to start with your early days. I know you were born in Brooklyn, but give us some background about your parents and your early childhood.
So I was, my family actually, my parents were both born in Brooklyn. I was born in Brooklyn, but raised actually on Long Island. And I had very little interest in the business. My father had a business, eventually a small shoe factory in a very tough part of New York called Williamsburg. And I had very little interest in it. They made women's shoes. It was not masculine enough. It wasn't the sort of thing I had envisioned. I wrote myself. I could see myself going down, and I was very intent on playing shortstop for the New York Mets. And and then at a certain point, I decided that I probably should go to law school. In that it wasn't all that clear as to the path of 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 preference, and that would only create options for me that later on that I could choose between. And so I was was another road I had chosen. But in the interim, I had spent a summer in my father's factory, and I gravitated to the sample room, and I was fascinated by the notion that what you could create with the components that existed, and the leather, the elast, the heel, insole, and how a slight change of any one of those components created a totally different product. And it wasn't. It was all aspects of design, and sculpture and engineering and all these art forms kind of converged. And at the end of the day, you created this object that had practical applications, and and it could be something that you felt that could be inspired by personal experience. You can actually try it on, you could wear it maybe, or somebody else could, and it could it could somehow connect to people in a very personal way. And I've always have said and believed that almost everything you wear affects how you look, but shoes specifically also affect how you feel. And you had this unique way of connecting with people.
Kenneth, your father's shoe company was called El Greco. Can you tell us why he started it? I mean, what was his inspiration for starting a shoe company?
He didn't start it, actually. He had acquired a factory. I think somebody had owed him some money, and they gave him a piece of this factory. And then he ended up owning it and learning the business as an adult. And I learned it from him. I mean, he wasn't on the creative side; he was more on the business side and sales side. So, but I was fascinated with the bringing the product to market and everything that went into that. And I learned early on that you needed to, in effect, put yourself in the shoes of the person that you want to relate to hope that they will proverbially put themselves in your shoes. So, it was a very kind of interpersonal experience. And I learned how to make patterns. I spent a lot of time with the pattern maker. And then I eventually taught myself to draw because I knew I was going to need to be able to do that to communicate thoughts and ideas. And I was fascinated. I had applied to law school. I was supposed to go to law school that fall, and I kept deferring. And eventually, I just never went.
Was El Greco also a brand that was like consumer facing, sold in stores, or was it mainly working with other brands?
No, it was a brand in and of itself, and they made shoes, not always original design shoes. And they sold them in better department stores in New York at the time. And then we started a business together called Candies. And Candies became a very big business. And that Candies was imported. They were made in Italy, and we ended up at that point closing the factory. and there's a whole lot of thinking that went into that, but that totally transformed everything that he had created. And the idea of if you own a physical factory, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of any one of components and processes, and any one of which could essentially shut you down. You ran out of thread, or you ran out of, or a certain employee didn't show up who operated a certain machine, or you ran out of a certain leather, and then essentially the factory comes to a halt. And then in the best days, you can only produce X amount of shoes, and in the worst days, you're out of business. So the equation wasn't a very attractive one. So we started importing some shoes from Italy called Candies, and which became a very big business very fast, and it ended up becoming the business, and quickly, and we ended up closing the factory, and started doing that. And after a few years, I chose to exit the business and do something very personal, individual, and knowing that if I didn't do it then, I probably never would. My life would only get more complicated as I got a little bit older, as I got married, if and when I got married, and if and when I had children. So I made the decision at that point to go in a different direction, also in Italy, with different kinds of factories making different kinds of products, and I have never looked back.
Kenneth, how early on in your childhood did you know that you wanted to learn the business from your dad? And the reason I ask is because, you haven't yet mentioned any of your educational kind of days. Were you not into school? I mean, was going into business something that you recognized early on and that you kind of just wanted to go down that path?
It's a good question. I wasn't sure business was what I wanted to do. Maybe specifically that business, the women's shoe business, was not something I saw myself wanting to pursue. And I thought a legal education would help me broaden the universe of paths that might become available and doors that might open. And so I wasn't thinking that was what I was going to do, and I ended up working with him that summer specifically because he had his number two person who was running the factory had just left him, and that was the proverbial hand that fed us, that shoe factory. So I felt I should learn the business if I could, to the degree that I could, and I kind of jumped in and immersed myself, and I saw things there that I didn't expect, and took away what I never thought I would, and it was I found it very satisfying.
Yeah. Were there any other brands that you were really inspired by growing up that you kind of looked to for just perhaps it was design inspiration, or just really admired their work?
There was always product that I was inspired by. It was usually typically contemporary product, a product that did things that others didn't, shoes that were made in ways that others hadn't been. Most of the brands in those days, I hate to admit, probably don't even know today. But I was always fascinated with the universe of alternatives. That what else could people avail themselves of? And because then, not much different than today. Nobody really needs what we sell. There's hardly an American today that needs another pair of shoes, especially black shoes. And our goal, and I realized early on, was to make you think you did, or make you want them, knowing you didn't need them, and then hope you make you want them again, and then again after that. So, and to do that, you had to kind of understand what were the alternatives that was available to that person. So, and it was the kind of being out in the world, out in the streets, out in the clubs at night, and seeing what people were wearing, and also seeing what they weren't, and trying to understand what the statement they were trying to make, and and if there was a better way they could be making it. And so, and I would also often say, kind of in a metaphorical way, I'd look in my closet in the morning and say, what do I wish was here? And then I'd go to work and make it. So, there's just a lot of stuff out in the world, especially today with the internet and the kind of coming together global economy. And people have lots of choices. They literally have infinite amount of choices. So I have to have a reason to exist, and I have to have a point of difference, and I have to be committed to it, and deliver on it. I have to create a fantasy, a dream, and I have to deliver on that consistently. And everything I do has to have a consistent point of view over a continuous point of time for it to in fact be a brand. Otherwise, it's just a label.
Kenneth,
And
you bring up an interesting word, choices, right? That we have a lot of choices now, and that e-commerce has made it, and direct to consumer has made it a lot easier, a lot more accessible to start a brand. But at the same time, that also means that these lots of choices means a lot more competition, right? As an entrepreneur in the fashion industry, what is your advice to somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur now and is competing with these choices? How should they stand out, or how can you stand out?
so, well, again, you have to have a point of difference, and you have to have a story to tell, and you have to tell it in a compelling way. And I think fashion is as much of an art as it is a science, and you have to understand not just what exists in the supply chain, but how it becomes available to people. And creativity, again, is not it's not just what you bring to market in and of itself. It's as much how you do it as what you do. And yes, everything that's available everywhere is available to you if you're resourceful and you're persistent. And in my point, from my point of view, everybody who wears shoes everywhere, in theory, is a prospective client. So, but at the same time, everybody who sells shoes everywhere is a prospective competitor. To your point a minute ago, and so I have to have a clear point of view, and I have to stick to it. There's an old adage about a story about a shoe salesman that goes down to Africa, comes back upon assignment, comes back and tells his boss, "I can't sell shoes down there. They don't wear shoes." And the guy sends it down a younger salesman, and he comes back a little bit later, and he says the opportunities are endless. They don't even have a pair. So it's through the lens through which you see the opportunity. I think is critical, and it's certainly that way in the shoe business as it is in most businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about how the Kenneth Cole brand came about. At what point did you decide? I want to start a brand and have it be called Kenneth Cole. And why you decided to make it your name, and also what the kind of first initial steps were of like what you were going to go about and design and create.
So I was, so I set out to start a business. I didn't know what the business was going to be at the time, truthfully. It wasn't preconceived. And I was talking to other designers about possibly working with them and partnering with them in different ways, and maybe doing just their shoes. And then I realized I needed to move quickly because I was going to run out of money. I was going to run out of resources and capital, human capital, financial capital. So and I knew I had a better chance of getting credit from a shoe factory that needed business than from a bank that didn't. So I ran to Italy and found agents and insurance and factories, and I sold them on the opportunity to work together and to get credit. So, and then I built a lot of cool lady shoes, came back, had to sell them. Before I went, I named the company, I should say, Kenneth Cole Inc., because, again, there wasn't Google in those days. And if I had made up a name, I stood a very high likelihood that within 6 months to a year or more, somebody could turn around and tell me that I can't use that name because somebody else was. And there wasn't, the whole trademark process wasn't as transparent as it is obviously now because of the internet. So and I knew I didn't want to take a chance of coming up with a name and then not being able to, having to pivot to a certain point. So I went with my own name because most people at that point, you could usually get your own name registered if in fact it was your name. And so so I set up.
It's a great name. I mean, like you got to thank your parents. Like if you were called like Georgina Thompson, like I don't think you could start a fashion brand with that name or with my name, Nurse as a Potion. I mean, you're shit out of luck. Like it's not going to be.
No, I think I wish I had your name. I think
we can trade for a day. We can trade for a day.
But I've lived with it for so long. I've just ingrained it in everybody's conscious for so long that it seems to work, and it does. And I am appreciative. I guess it could have been a worse name. But I'm not sure I would have made a lot of choices that I made under those circumstances. I might be orchestrating podcasts and narrating podcasts if I had your name. So in any case, so I set up Kenneth Cole Inc. I made some business cards because I needed some stationery. I needed to be able to introduce myself to people over in Italy. And that took about a day. And then I made some cool samples there because I went in the factories that I was able to connect to. And I came back and had to sell them. And at the time, there were two choices. You could take a room at the Hilton Hotel, because at the time, that's what the shoe companies did, who sold branded fashion shoes. And there was about 1,100 companies, and there was 30 some odd floors, 30 some odd rooms per floor. And it was not a very attractive alternative. Plus, it was not without a cost, an insignificant cost that I wasn't sure I could even afford. So, and the alternative was a big fancy showroom within a 2-block radius of the Hilton Hotel, which clearly I didn't have the time or the money for that. So on a whim, called a friend in the trucking business, said if I could figure out how to park one of your 40-foot trailers on the corner of 6th Avenue, 56th Street, will you lend it to me? And he said, of course, jerk, but you can park a bicycle in New York for 10 minutes, let alone a truck for 3 days. But if you can figure out how to do it, I'll lend it to you. And in fact, I'll even help you decorate it. So called the mayor's office. It was Mayor Koch. Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, how does one get permission to park a trailer on the corner of 6th Avenue, 56th Street? Answer, sorry, son, they don't. This is New York. We give permission only in two circumstances: if you're a utility company servicing the streets, AT&T and Con Ed, or if you're a production company shooting for like motion picture, because we're going through an I Love New York campaign in the early 80s. We probably still are today. So that afternoon, I went to a stationery store, changed the name of the company from Kenneth Cole Inc. to Kenneth Cole Productions Inc., filed for a permit the next morning for permission to shoot a full-length motion picture called The Birth of a Shoe Company. We opened for business on December 2nd. I had a cameraman. Sometimes there was film in his camera, sometimes there wasn't. And I had Klieg lights and I had stanchions. And in 3 days, I saw every important buyer in the industry. And the more important they were, the longer I made them wait. And we sold 40,000 pair of shoes after 2.5 days. And there was a payphone on the corner. That was my link to the factories. And I was every few hours, I was adjusting production from the high heel to the low heel to the red to the blue, and I was off and running.
Kenneth, I saw that you had started Kenneth Cole Productions Inc. or Kenneth Cole Inc. With Sam Edelman, who also has an eponymous, fashion company. How did that relationship come to be?
Sam was a good friend. Sam worked with me at El Greco. And then I had left my father, and Sam said, "Look, I'm not staying here if you're not." And I said, "All right, I just got to get my father okay with this." So he came with me, and we started the business together. And Sam was again a good friend, very talented and good salesman, and and he helped launch Kenneth Cole Productions.
So after a birth of a shoe company and selling all these pairs, what kind of came next? I mean, did you decide I need to open up a store, like a formal kind of flagship storefront, or what?
So the first season in business, we sold pretty much we sold almost everybody. We sold Bloomingdale's, Bergdorf's, Saks, Macy's. So and after about 2 years, maybe not even, I felt that if we're going to really have a brand that's going to tell a story, we needed to have the ability to control that story, and you couldn't do that in a traditional department store, and we needed our own physical space. So we signed a lease for a small store on Columbus Avenue, which was very popular space, very where there was a few avant-garde retailers, and opened the first Kenneth Cole store between 76 and 77th Street on Columbus Avenue. At that, about 2 years into business, and 3 years into business, we started men's shoes. And every year we would kind of launch something new and kind of push the envelope a little bit. I could have, I had to make a decision at those points. I needed to grow the business because I just felt I needed to do that. And I had two choices. I could I could sell more shoes to more people, but I felt I stood the chance of diminishing the brand, because the brand would likely be less cool if I started to find audiences that were a little less cool. So I decided that I'll sell more products to the same customers rather than more shoes to more customers. So that was a path. I decided to become a lifestyle brand, in effect, and starting with men's shoes, and then handbags, and then slowly over time, apparel.
So, Kenneth, just taking it back a step, I know you had mentioned selling 40,000 pairs of shoes in 2.5 days, which is obviously an incredible feat. And this is more of a hypothetical, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it's just something that I thought about. If you were doing that today, right? And of course, luck has a big role to play, but how do you do that now, right? For those that are listening that either have a business or are looking to start a company in whatever space it may be, how do you reach that quickly, that many people, and not only reach them, but get them to pay for something?
Look, the times are very different, but so are the resources. I think today you can reach many more people with way less expense and effort, and virtually. So, and you can reach significantly larger audiences. And there are these digitally native businesses that are popping up every 15 minutes. And if you have a compelling enough story to tell, and you have one that people want to share, through viral, realities, people, you can connect with everybody everywhere. They used to say there were 7 degrees of separation. I believe today it's 2.5. I mean, everybody knows somebody who knows everybody. So you can today, I think, you have to go through the customer necessarily. I went through an industry, through a marketplace. So it was a different process, but I think being an entrepreneur is a unique skill, and I don't think it's for everybody, but I do think it's about doing what you have to do to the degree you need to do it, regardless of what it takes. So, and Um, so, um, and I think that, uh, um, and that initially manifests itself with selling a specific product. We just launched something totally alien to me. It had nothing to do with anything I was even slightly familiar with a couple of years ago, called NFTs. And I still don't know what the hell they are, but we
I
launched
still don't know what
them.
they are either.
We launched them recently, and we sold out in 2 hours. But and that was through a virtual platform, not knowing who would, if anyone would show up or not. And I had a party, and I sent out limited invitations. Would anybody show up? I don't know. And if they did, would they? How responsive, enthusiastic, and supportive would they be if and when they did? So, not knowing any of that, but we sold all our NFTs. 500 of them in 2 hours. If we had 5,000, would you have sold them? I think so. And maybe 3 hours or 4, who knows? But I think today, if you have a product that people want, you can reach more people more efficiently, more productively than you ever could before.
You mentioned some of the department stores that the brand was in early on. How did they just take notice after that kind of whole kind of birth of a shoe company thing, or did you like have to go out there and hard sell your product into some of these stores?
I think that everybody's curious about something that's different. We were different. And we were, by the way, going through a downturn in the economy in the early 80s. And I've always believed that in good times, people want to just do what they're doing and do more of it. If you have a product that's selling, make as much money as you can, deliver them to as many of the same kinds of customers as quickly as you can, and you'll scale your business. Um, so, and if you have a store, you open more of those stores in similar malls, similar cities as quickly as you can. So, but in tough times, people want creative alternatives. And we represented ourselves to be a creative alternative. And, nobody bought a lot. Everybody was curious, and people wanted to buy some. So, especially when it was perceived to be in demand, and by other people that they perceived to respect. So, we didn't know where this road was going to take us. I didn't know this was the business I was going to be in probably a month before I was in it, and maybe 2, and then I wasn't sure where it was going to take me from there. But again, as an entrepreneur, you don't have necessarily long-term plans. You have plans to make plans, and you proceed thoughtfully, deliberately, but one step at a time. The business, I've always believed, needed to be agile, relevant, and profitable. And those are the 3 filters that we've used. And we were pivoting, 40 years ago, before it was a popular business practice.
Yeah,
and every day you look in the mirror, every day you look in the paper, you read the news, and you reflect on what's happening in the world, and there's all these forces that come into play that you can't control. And so you have to continue to factor them into the equation. And over the years, I've continuously said to my associates, are we going to do on Monday just because it's what we did last Monday, or is it still the right thing to do? So much is changing all the time, changing in people's minds and our perceptions. The shoes, still the same shoes, and they're going to fit the same way. But at the end of the day, what is that process of connecting to people is changing rapidly, and you need to essentially, again, put yourself emotionally out there, and understand where people are, and then respond to them accordingly. There's something I often talk about and think about, or I don't think I've often articulated this way. Is a decision tree. So, and a process. So if I want to sell somebody a pair of shoes, I got to pass no less than 4 tests. And you have to know that, and you have to know what those tests are, and you have to know the order you have to pass them. And the first test is, do I look good? Is the product look appealing? And if it does, then I get to take the next test. For some people, it's the price. Some people, it's the brand. And then the third is the one that it isn't the other. And then the fourth test is how does it feel when you try it on? So, and I got to pass each of those tests. So if I'm going to ultimately consummate a transaction, and you have to know that. So,
Kenneth, how do you inject objectivity into that test? Because a lot of those questions that you kind of articulated are or could be very subjective in terms of how something looks, how it fits. So, how, as a founder, as a leader of a company, of a brand, do you infuse some level of like objectiveness into that decision making process?
I think that's a really good question, and I do it intuitively. At most people, people struggle with it. I struggle with it sometimes too. But creating the product, is very emotional, very personal. And then, but once it's done, I become very objective, and I have no problem. And I would, over the years, would sit on the subway or walk the streets, and I see people wearing the product, or on occasion mention or reference the product in a positive and or negative way. And I am very non-emotional about it. So and I don't take it personally, and I think that's critical to be able to be successful here. And I can look at it as critical, probably more critical than most people, about what we're doing wrong, and or better yet, what we could do better. I don't really like to talk about what we're doing wrong. But so how do we, what's working and what can we do better? That's essentially the questions that I would continue to challenge our associates, to myself, associates, to ask ourselves, and in a non-emotional way.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've seen so many brands come and go in this fashion space, and some of them have come and sticked with kind of their initial audience as they've grown older, and perhaps have not, have become like a not so cool brand anymore because the younger maybe kids aren't wearing it. But I feel like your brand has been able to kind of stand the test of time and really like appeal to so many different audiences. And is it really just what you just said, like paying attention, seeing what trends there are, what people, and maybe not like following the trends, obviously, you want to kind of lead those trends, but how do you kind of stay up to date with all those things?
I guess if you're able to, I was, if you can, again, put yourself in the previous shoes. I was making product for myself. So, and what would I wear? And as I said before, I'd look in the closet. What do I wish was here? And then I'd make it. I go to work and make it. If it was only a little bit, softer. Oh, if it's a little bit higher. Oh, if it was a little bit this or that. And that is something not everybody can do easily. And and I would insist on being out in the market. I traveled around the world a lot over the years, every year, and I was consistently in the stores, and it was important to me not to see what was out there and what people were wearing, not so I knew what to make, but often usually what not to make, and what didn't exist, what wasn't there. Today it's I'm probably jumping ahead of where you want to go here, but today is a very different story, because today I don't believe anybody needs anything. There isn't a person, as I said before, that needs another pair of shoes, black shoes, or anything. And everybody, one of the most precious and valuable commodities in almost everybody's life is closet space, and they don't have any. So I've got to earn a right in your already crowded closet to exist, which means something else invariably is going to have to go. And I have to have a more of a viable reason to exist than it does.
So I have a question. I know you had mentioned some of these retailers earlier, and I don't consider myself to be a fashion expert by any means, or a fashion retailer expert either. But your brand, Kenneth Cole, was in several different retailers. I think you had mentioned Bloomingdale's. I know I've seen it at Macy's. What impact, from a perception standpoint, does being in one retailer versus the other have on the brand? because I know when Pat and I are 30, so when we were growing up, when we were kids up to our high school years, Macy's was definitely, in my opinion, a higher end kind of store, and now it's gone to become, from my perception again, more of like a J.C. Penney. And so how, and maybe I'm wrong, but how has that impacted the brand Kenneth Cole and perhaps even other brands that sell in those retailers?
You know, this is a process that you weigh all the time. And I was, when we first started for years, every product that we brought to market, I had my own department at Bloomingdale's, my second year in business on the main floor, lady shoes. And then slowly they brought in everything that we did for a period of time. And then as the Nordstrom, and then as the Macy's. So, and then we went public about 10 years into business. Why? Because I guess that was another mountain to scale, that a way to access resources less emotionally, and to grow the business in ways probably with resources that you couldn't otherwise. So we went public, traded on the New York Stock Exchange for 20 years. And there's the inherent pressure to grow the business and to scale the business. So you tend to make decisions you might not make otherwise. And so we sold a lot to Macy's. We sold a lot to a lot of retailers. And then at about 20 years into this, I was talking to some friends, and the question was, why are you public? And I hadn't, I just, because I was, but I hadn't realized that I could change that. So I made an exerted effort to go private, which was one of the best decisions that I've made over the years. And if you don't need to be public, it is so debilitating, having to deal in public markets and subject to all the oversight and compliance and protocols of being a public commodity. So we went private maybe, I don't know, close to about 10 years ago now, or so, and which was a very wise, with the plan to ultimately change the business, and in fact, to your point, to get smaller so we can get bigger. And because we were more doors than we should be, some products we probably shouldn't have. And but I could not have made some of those tough decisions if we were still public.
Had you not made that decision, do you think the brand would still be around today?
That's a good question. I like to think I have a lot of I feel we would have been around. I don't know what we would be. I think we'd probably be a different kind of company today. But I do think that I do think I'm realistic, and I do look in the mirror all the time, and I do reflect on the viability of what we're doing, and how to, and what to do, and how to position ourselves where I see the world going. And so I don't think we'd be the same company we are today if we were still public, to your point.
Yeah. What does your involvement look like today with the company? How hands-on are you with perhaps design or other things? Yeah, could you share a little bit there?
So I'm still very involved. I am. I'm CEO, I'm Chief Creative Officer as well. I love it, which is why I still do it. And I do think you have to love it today if you're going to succeed at something. And you have to recognize that this isn't a 9-to-5 job. It never will be. And to the degree you treat it as that, you will not be successful. But you have to make life compromises to succeed at anything you set out to do. And I committed to do this. But one of the things I also committed to do was to somehow merge other personal needs that were important to me, and family, community, and there was community interest initiatives that were important to me and still are, and I infused them into the business very early on. And social philanthropy, it was initially philanthropy, and then maybe social impact. And I made them part of the business, part of the brand, which also made it even that much more fulfilling. and family. And my family works with me with it periodically at different aspects of the business. So,
Kenneth, we
but
definitely want to delve into those because I think that is a huge part of who you are and your purpose. Um, and before we do that, though, I think that it's important for perhaps you to share what some of those compromises that you made were to pursue entrepreneurship. Because Patrick and I have been doing this now for this podcast for 4.5+ years, and we've had 200 and I don't know 20 plus people that have been on the podcast. And when we started it, we were both 25 and very into entrepreneurship. Still are, maybe a little bit more jaded now, but you realize how unsexy entrepreneurship is, right? You realize how brutal it can be, and you realize how much you have to give up to be an entrepreneur. What are some of those realities for you, or what were some of those realities for you that you can perhaps share and could be both motivating or a complete somebody hears this and says, you know what, I don't want to be an entrepreneur anymore.
you know, um, I think I alluded to before. It's the commitment basically to do whatever it takes, no matter what it takes. And there's no rules, and you got to give of yourself physically and emotionally, in ways you might not imagine. But you have to be so. It has to. You have to really want it, and if you do, and you have to find rewards in doing it, and not just financial, because it takes time sometimes to realize the financial return. And if you can get yourself there, it can be a very fulfilling journey. And the journey hopefully becomes even more rewarding than its destination. Um, and I set out down this road, not sure where it was going to take me, and what what would become of it. I had not a clue. There's not a shot I would have anticipated that I'd still be in this same sort of business all these years later, let alone doing what I'm doing. So, but you have to want it. If you want it in your heart and you commit to it, like I'm sure you have with this podcast. I mean, you've been persevering and dedicated to it, and you've had a lot of success doing it.
Yeah.
So
I think it was a couple years ago, if I'm not mistaken, when you launched the Mental Health Coalition. Perhaps I think I might have read it was right before the pandemic, which is very interesting timing because I'm sure a lot of things changed and there's a lot more work to do at that point. But what prompted you to decide, I want to kind of pursue this mission of destigmatizing, mental health, and what's kind of been the main focus since then?
So I spent a lot of years, Patrick, working in HIV. A lot of years, like 30 years. I was chairman of AMFAR. I do believe we had a huge impact on millions of people's lives. And I could step back from that. My family wasn't really interested in HIV, but they were very. One daughter, Amanda specifically, was I was working with in a lot of our CSR stuff. Social responsibility, was very focused on mental health, as it later became my other daughter, Katie. So, and we're working as a company with NAMI to institute an initiative, a stigma-free workplace. This is what they were trying to get other companies to do. So we committed, on my daughter's urging, to go down that road. And then they came, NAMI came and tried to convince us that would we work on an anti-stigma campaign, mental health, like I had for HIV for so many years. And I believed that the change, first of all, they say it was 1 in 200 people who were living with HIV. 1 in 4, or apparently, according to WHO, were living with mental health issues, related issues. And I came to believe very quickly it was 4 and 4. If it wasn't you, it's somebody you loved, somebody in the family, in the community, in the workplace. But we were all living with it, and when you sit back and you reflect, and 2/3 of those were doing so in the proverbial shadows because there wasn't the tools to confront it and to talk about it, and there was nothing societal that nobody accepted one's vulnerability, and we didn't teach you how to be empathetic. People didn't understand the tools of dealing with other individuals' struggles, let alone their own. So, am I thinking to change this is going to require changing culture. It's such a massive overhaul because none of the tools that exist were usable. The existing vocabulary was all stigmatized. I asked 5 psychiatrists for a definition of depression. I got 5 different answers. None of them were empowering. None of them could you use and feel good about using. So we set out to say, okay, well, if we are going to try to do this, it's a massive undertaking, changing culture, new narrative, new vocabulary, rebranding mental health. And what are my qualifications? I'm in the perception business. Okay, I'm not a public health person. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not all that. So, and I just and Nami said we're all in, and then we said, okay, well, let's see if we can make this a bigger initiative. And we systematically reached out to all the largest mental health service providers in the country, all the important ones that were serving different disparate and at need, at risk communities, and every one of them said we're in. So now we've got this very impressive community of organizations who, in fact, were qualified, and who all agreed to work together and collaborate and cooperate, communicate on a path to destigmatize mental health, understanding that was the biggest single and most important obstacle everybody had to confront, as it was with HIV. So and then we started bringing in some great creative companies. Pentagram said, we'll help you with all the graphics pro bono, and then iHeart, and then we started, Facebook came on board and said, this is great, we love this. Our aggregated list of resources from all of our partners became probably the most comprehensive list that existed in the universe. If you wanted to get access to mental health services, you had to go to 75 websites. There wasn't a place you could go where it all. So we had this aggregated list now, and it became the well-being default for Instagram and other Facebook platforms, and now we're starting to work with Google as well. So the goal now is if we could bring. So now we have an initiative to rebrand mental health, making very significant progress. Ultimately, now building communities, which has become, we're realizing, is part of needs to happen, and then ultimately to marry needs to resources. Take all these. We have the communities, and now you have the resources. How do you connect the dots? Then with this, I always thought would take decades. This was going to be generational, but in fact, it isn't that, because there is these industries, big tech today does this for a living, and they connect everything, everywhere, everything to everybody in the ordinary course, and we're making very impressive. We're just getting. We've done some great stuff that's being highly regarded and supported, and connecting with millions of people in positive ways and positively helping people. We launched an initiative that actually my daughter Katie spearheaded a couple years ago at the very beginning of COVID, which asked the most asked question everywhere in the world, every day of the week in every language, and the one most rarely ever answered, which is, how are you really? And we challenge people to answer the question, and then we encourage others to engage with that, and to also do the same, and to build a database of people's individual reflections. And we had over 200,000 engagements the first weekend when we launched this, and I went on the air with Kendall Jenner, and then it was a challenge, and Kim Kardashian retweeted, and Justin Bieber retweeted. So and then all of a sudden 200 million people, as I just said, the first weekend. Um, uh, and then we launched another initiative last year with Instagram on Mental Health Awareness Month. Every day in May, we had a different conversation with somebody with a very large audience of followers, and they vulnerably discussed their struggles with somebody they're inclined to speak to, both of whom usually had large audiences. And we had a wonderful engagement, very impressive engagement from various minority and at-risk communities. And we connected with over 700 million people, had access to the content that we put out during that last month of May. So today, you can reach people like you never could before, as we were talking about a little while ago with fashion. And you can do it effortlessly. You can do it almost virtually simultaneously. And the opportunities are really endless, what you can get done today.
Kenneth, do you think that entrepreneurs and founders of companies are in a better position today to influence and create policy that impacts this country and even beyond in a positive manner versus the politicians and elected leaders?
Well, I don't. It's hard for me to say that. I've been doing this all my life, and certainly all my business life, my professional life, and then very early on when we went public, which was about 30 years ago, people would say, "Well, is it really your place as a public company to be using resources to talk about political issues?" And my answer was, first of all, I was doing this before I went public, so nobody who signed on, everybody knew what they were signing on to. So, and independent of that, they're not political issues. These are human issues or social issues. They're not, and they've been politicized. I'll give you that, but that's not the road I'm on. And to the degree you can avoid that narrative, you can reach people in very meaningful ways. And I have said from the very beginning that it's so much more powerful to talk to people about not just what they stand in, but what they stand for, and not just what they look like on the outside, but who they are on the inside. And it's so much more sustainable, and over time, and much more so than a heel height or a hem length, or any other silhouette that we could bring to market. So, I've done that, and it makes what I do more fulfilling for me. And I do, to the degree you can impact people in meaningful ways, then I do think it elevates our relationship in ways that the product alone can't do.
Mm-hmm.
If you could go back, pivoting a little to the business side, if you could go back in time and, change something or any part of the business that you created, what would it be?
Well, I mean, one thing is, people ask me if I have any regrets, and I always say no. I don't have any regrets. Everything I've ever done, whether it's worked out or hasn't, has informed decisions I've made afterwards, and it's enabled me to be the person I am today and to do what I've been able to do today. So I have no regrets. When I've done things differently in retrospect, looking back, I used to think that my job is to sell shoes. I think I referred to this earlier. I've come to realize that you can't build a business selling people shoes once. And so, and I needed to focus. I was obsessed with how it looked, and I spent 5 minutes on how it felt. And today I focus much more on how it feels and less on how it looks. And today, you need to come back. I need to have an ongoing relationship with our customers. There's only so many of them out there at the end of the day. And the cost to retain the customers becomes much more viable to the degree you can keep them. So that wasn't the case earlier on in my journey.
As someone who, as a designer and perhaps sees the world a little maybe differently as, than others, maybe, in a more creative way, perhaps. And obviously now we hear and see a lot of just negativity in the world, right? A lot going on. I'm curious, in your perspective, what's something that you're very excited or optimistic about, whether it's in fashion or in general?
Um, what am I excited about? Is that the question, Patrick? What am I excited about?
Yeah.
I do think we can. We just last weekend watched these kids from Florida who had set up this March for Our Lives movement, who last year and then during the elections probably did more in a few months to positively impact the gun movement than my generation has done in 40 years. So I think today you can connect with people in meaningful ways, and you can make a meaningful impact. And I think you have to be genuine. You have to be authentic, as they say, and I do think that it bodes well for the business. And in the past, I started to say before, when people would challenge what we did before, they'd say, "Is it right for a public company to be spending consumers' resources on issues like this?" And in fact, is it related? And my answer is not only is it not unrelated, it's interrelated, and not only are they not connected, but they're interconnected. And I do believe that community outreach and engagement is the proverbial hand that connects, um, that feeds you as the business person, and you need to service that person in more ways, in more meaningful ways, not just superficial ways. So, and those relationships are very sustainable if you can do that.
Kenneth, you're obviously a very busy individual, and between the businesses, between the social impact work that you're doing, what do you spend your free time on? Whatever the definition of free time means to you.
Um, and I don't have a lot of free time, but but I guess pre-COVID I traveled a lot more than I do now. Uh, but I love what I do, and I love the ability to to connect with people, to positively impact people and people's lives when I can, and when the opportunity presents itself. I have a hard time walking away from it. And I love to fish. I love to play golf. I love to be out in the world. I have a home in Martha's Vineyard, um, and I like to merge that also with what I do to the degree that you can. And so people ask me if I grew up in New York, and I tell them no, but I intend to.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Um, I was asked a similar question to that not that many years ago, and my answer to it was that I don't think today. I think today that's almost, with all due respect, an irrelevant question, because the world is changing today so fast, and you need to resist thinking that far out, because we don't have the ability to anticipate where the world is going to be in 5 years. And people are talking about self-driving cars. They're going to be flying cars probably faster than self-driving cars, and everything we know and understand is going to be. It just as it. A few years ago, I was talking to Women's Wear Daily, and they asked me some question, and I said, the largest taxi company in the world today didn't exist 5 years ago, and they don't even own any of their own cars. It was Uber. And the largest accommodations provider doesn't own any real estate, and it's Airbnb. And the largest um, uh, media company doesn't even create its own content. It's Facebook. And and they hardly existed, or certainly not in that format 5 years ago. So I just think you can't. I think what I've done with my business here, we're just about to celebrate 40 years. We built a platform that is agile and pivots in response to things in an ordinary course. And you need to prepare for what you can't anticipate, and you need to focus on what you can and execute in efficiently to the degree you're able. And I don't know what um, I don't know what the metaverse has in store for us. I don't know how I'm going to exist there. It doesn't feel like who I'm going to know there, and how I'm going to go about my days there. But I'm fascinated by it. So, and there are those individuals I do believe who are frustrated and uh, and resistant to change, and there's those that embrace it and thrive from it. And I try desperately to be the latter. And I don't always get there easily, but because I do believe that former group won't be in business. It's just a matter of time, and you've got to anticipate change. You got to embrace it, and you've got to be inspired by it, because at the end of the day, it's basically what we're all watching happen. I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, I'm staggered every day by all these massive changes in the way people come into the world and how they exist once they're in it, the physical world, let alone the virtual world. So, and so you get between Web3 now and the NFTs and how you transact and where everything exists and how we consume it and engage with it. Is changing at such astoundingly fast paces. I don't know. Maybe you guys have a sense of where it's going to be in 5 years. I don't have a clue.
And by the way, I hate that question too, which is why I asked it, and you gave the perfect response. I mean, and a lot of times it's funny because employers will just ask you, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? It's like, well, I see myself making a lot more money than you're offering me right now, right? Like that's the first. But I think that the response that you gave and the fact that you've built a company that is agile is really the right response. I think that companies that are either in existence now or starting out need to be flexible, right? I know that a few months ago there was this huge movement of everything has to go into Web3, and that's kind of taken a step back, obviously. And I think we're going to go through this recessionary period, and things will change and slow down a bit. But it's inevitable that there will be a component of that virtual augmented reality that will play a role in our personal lives, in our business lives, in the way that we make money, spend money, recruit people. And I do think that as a leader, you have to be open to those ideas, even if those are not the ideas that you started your movements, your businesses with. So, thank you for your insight, your knowledge, and sharing your story. I think that it's a huge inspiration for all those that are listening that want to become entrepreneurs, whether in fashion or not, and that social impact and the work that you're doing can be tied into business. I think they call it social entrepreneurship, and I think we're seeing a lot more of it, and um, hopefully we will see that trend continue.
It used to be called philanthropy, and then it became social impact, and maybe social entrepreneurship is the right term people use now. I don't know, but in the past, it was those who said didn't do, those who didn't say, and but you couldn't make money doing it. It was something you did for the greater good. Today, it's you can, and today you can, if you can serve certain people's needs and needs of certain communities. It's okay to realize and prosper from it in socially and culturally and financially. So and I think it's it's something I encourage students to consider seriously, and as they're coming out of schools and they're planning their path forward. And I do believe, to the degree you become a change agent, an agent of change, your journey will be so much more rewarding than you could possibly imagine otherwise. And it's not about the destination. It's very much about the journey, and it's about your steps and your paths forward from this day forward.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much, Ken, and congrats on 40 years. That's amazing and incredible, and we can't wait to see where things go from here. And Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Posh. And this was very enjoyable. Forward to being in touch.